This is reading of Emma Goldman's Living My Life, Chapter 2. I had worked in factories before in St. Petersburg. In the winter of 1882, when Mother, my two little brothers, and I came from Königsberg to join Father in the Russian capital, we found that he had lost his position. He had been manager of his cousin's dry goods store, but shortly before our arrival, the business failed. The loss of his job was a tragedy to our family, as Father had not managed to save anything. The only breadwinner then was Helena. Mother was forced to turn to her brothers for a loan. The 300 rubles they advanced were invested in a grocery store. The business yielded little at first, and it became necessary for me to find employment. Father's cousin, who had failed in the dry goods business, now owned a glove factory. He offered to teach me the trade and give me work. The factory was far from our place. One had to get up at 5 in the morning to be at work at 7. The rooms were stuffy, unventilated, and dark. Our lamps gave the light. The sun never penetrated the workroom. There were 600 of us, of all ages, working on costly and beautiful gloves day in, day out, for very small pay. But we were allowed sufficient time for our noon meal and twice a day for tea. We could talk and sing while at work. We were not driven or harassed. That was in St. Petersburg in 1882. Now I was in America, in the flower city of the state of New York, in a model factory, as I was told. Certainly, Garson's clothing works were a vast improvement on the glove factory of the Vasilevsky Ostrov. The rooms were large, bright, and airy. One had elbow space. There were none of these ill-smelling odors that used to nauseate me in our cousin's shop. Yet the work here was harder, and the day, with only half an hour for lunch, seemed endless. The iron discipline forbade free movement. One could not even go to the toilet without permission. And the constant surveillance of the foreman weighed like stone on my heart. The end of each day found me sapped, with just enough energy to drag myself to my sister's home and crawl to bed. The next morning, the enervating routine started all over again, continuing for weeks and months, broken only by the new arrival in our family, a baby girl. The child became the one interest in my dull existence. Often, the atmosphere in Garson's factory threatened to overcome me. The thought of the lovely mite at home revived my spirit. The evenings were no longer dreary or meaningless. But while little Stella brought joy into our household, she added to the material anxiety of my sister and my brother-in-law. Lena never by word or deed made me feel that the $1.50 I was giving her for my board, the car fare amounted to 60 cents a week, the remaining 40 cents being my pin money, did not cover my keep. But I had overheard my brother-in-law grumbling over the growing expenses of the house. I felt he was right. I did not want my sister worried. She was nursing her child. I decided to apply for a rise. I knew it was no use talking to the foreman, and therefore I asked to see Mr. Garson. I was ushered into a luxurious office. American beauties were on the table. Often I had admired them in the flower shops, and once, unable to withstand the temptation, I had gone in to ask the price. They were $1.50 apiece, more than half of my week's earnings. The lovely vase in Mr. Garson's office had held the great money, many of them. I was not asked to sit down. For a moment I forgot my mission. The beautiful room, the roses, the aroma on the bluish smoke from Mr. Garson's cigar fascinated me. I was recalled to reality by my employer's question. Well, what can I do for you? I had come to ask for a raise, I told him. The $2.50 I was getting did not pay my board, let alone anything else, such as the occasional book or theater ticket for 25 cents. Mr. Garson replied that for a factory girl, I had rather extravagant tastes, that all his hands, in quotations, were well satisfied, that they seemed to be getting along all right, that I, too, would have to manage or find work elsewhere. If I raise your wages, I'll have to raise the others, as well as I can't afford that, he said. I decided to leave Garson's employ. A few days later, I secured a job at Rubinstein's factory at $4 a week. It was a small shop not far from where I lived. The house stood in a garden, and only a dozen men and women were employed in the place. The Garson's drive were missing. The Garson discipline and drive were missing. Next to my machine worked an attractive young man whose name was Jacob Kirschner. He lived near Lena's home, and we would often walk to work from work together. Before long, he began calling for me in the morning. We used to converse in Russian, my English still being very halting. His Russian was like music to me. It was the first real Russian outside of Helena's that I had an opportunity to hear in Rochester since my arrival. The late fall of 1886 brought the rest of our family to Rochester: father, mother, my brothers, Herman, and Yegor. Conditions in St. Petersburg had become intolerable for the Jews, and grocery business did not yield enough for the ever-growing bribery father had to practice in order to be allowed to exist. America became the only solution. Together with Helena, I had prepared a home for our parents, and on their arrival, we went to live with them. Our earnings soon proved inadequate to meet the household expenses. Jacob Kirschner offered to board with us, which would be of some help, and before long he moved in. On nearer acquaintance, I had grown to understand that we were too different. His interest in books, which had first attracted me to him, had waned. He had fallen into ways of his stopmates, playing cards and attending dull dances. I, on the contrary, was filled with striving and aspirations. In spirit, I was still in Russia, in my beloved St. Petersburg, living in the world of the books I had read, the operas I had heard, the circle of students I had known. I hated Rochester even more than before, but Kirschner was the only human being I had met since my arrival. He filled a void in my life. I was strongly attracted to him. In February 1887, we were married in Rochester by a rabbi, according to Jewish rites, which were then considered sufficiently by the law of the country. My feverish excitement of the day, my suspense and ardent anticipation gave way at night to a feeling of utter bewilderment. Jacob lay trembling near me. He was impotent. The first erotic sensation I remember had come to me when I was about 6. My parents lived in Poplin then, where we children had no home in any real sense. Father kept an inn, which was constantly filled with peasants, drunk and quarreling, and government officials. I was left to myself most of the day. Among the stable help, there was a young peasant, Petrushka, who served as shepherd, looking after our cows and sheep. Often we would take me with him to the meadows, and I would listen to the sweet tones of his flute. In the evening, he would carry me back home on his shoulders. I sitting astride, he would play horse, run as fast as his legs could carry him then suddenly throw me up in the air, catch me in his arms, and press me to him. It used to give me a peculiar sensation, fill me with exaltation, followed by blissful release. I became inseparable from Petrushka. I grew so fond of him that I began stealing cake and fruit from mother's pantry for him. To be with Petrushka, out on the fields, to listen to his music, to ride on his shoulders, became the obsession of my waking and sleeping hours. One day, father had an altercation with Petrushka, and the boy was sent away. The loss of him was one of the greatest tragedies of my child life. For weeks afterwards, I kept on dreaming of Petrushka, the meadows, the music, and reliving the joy and ecstasy of our play. One morning, I felt myself torn out of sleep. Mother was bending over me, tightly holding my right hand. In an angry voice, she cried, "If I ever find your hand again like that, I'll whip you, and you naughty child." The approach of puberty gave me my first consciousness of the effect of men on me. I was 11 then. Early one summer day, I woke up in great agony. My head, spine, and legs ached if they were being pulled asunder. I called for mother. She drew back my bed covers, and suddenly I felt stinging pain in my face. She had struck me. I let out a shriek, fastening on mother's terrified eyes. "This is necessary for a girl," she said, "when she becomes a woman, as a protection against disgrace." She tried to take me in her arms, but I pushed her back. I was writhing in pain, and I was too outraged for her to touch me. "I'm going to die," I howled. "I want the feldsher," meaning assistant doctor. The feldsher was sent for. He was a young man, a newcomer to our village. He examined me and gave me something to put me to sleep. Thenceforth, my dreams were of the feldsher. When I was 15, I was employed in a corset factory in the Hermitage Arcade in St. Petersburg. After working hours on leaving the shop together with the other girls, we would be waylaid by young Russian officers and civilians. Most of the girls had their sweethearts, only a Jewish girl, chum of mine, and I refused to be taken to the konditorskaya, meaning pastry shop, or to the dark. Next to the Hermitage was a hotel we had to pass. One of the clerks, a handsome fellow of about 20, singled me out for his attention. At first, I scorned him, but gradually he began to exert a fascination on me. For several months, my admirer and I met clandestinely. One day he asked me whether I should not like to go through the hotel to see the luxurious rooms. I had never been in a hotel before. The joy and gaiety I fancied behind the gorgeous windows used to fascinate me as I would pass the place on my way from work. The boy led me through a side entrance along a thickly carpeted corridor into a large room. It was brightly illuminated and beautifully furnished. A table near the sofa had flowers and tea tray. We sat down. The young man poured out a golden-colored liquid and asked me to clink glasses to our friendship. I put the wine to my lips. Suddenly, I found myself in his arms. My waist torn open, his passionate kisses covered my face, neck, and breasts. Not until after the violent contact of our bodies and the excruciating pain he caused me did I come to my senses. I screamed, savagely beating against the man's chest with my fists. Suddenly, I heard Helena's voice in the hall. She must be here. She must be here. I became speechless. The man, too, was terrorized. His grip relaxed, and we listened in breathless silence. After what seemed to me hours, Helena's voice receded. The man got up. I rose mechanically buttoned my waist, and brushed back my hair. Strange, I felt no shame, only a great shock at the discovery that the contact between man and woman could be so brutal and so painful. I walked out in a daze, bruised in every nerve. When I reached home, I found Helena fearfully wrought up. The shame I did not feel in the arms of the man now overwhelmed me. I could not muster up courage to tell Helena of my experience. After that, I always felt between two fires in the presence of men. Their lure remained strong, but it was always mingled with violent revulsion. I could not bear to have them touch me. These pictures passed through my mind vividly as I lay alongside my husband on our wedding night. He had fallen fast asleep. The weeks went on. There was no change. I urged Jacob to consult a doctor. At first he refused, pleading deference, but finally he went. He was told it would take considerable time to build up his manhood. My own passion had subsided. The material anxiety of making ends meet excluded everything else. I had stopped work. It was considered disgraceful for a married woman to go to the shop. Jacob was earning $15 a week. He had developed a passion for cards, which swallowed up a considerable part of our income. He grew jealous, suspecting everyone. Life became insupportable. I was saved from utter despair by my interest of the Haymarket events. After the death of the Chicago anarchist, I insisted on a separation from Kirshner. He fought long against it, but finally consented to a divorce. It was given to us by the same rabbi who had performed our marriage ceremony. Then I filed for New Haven. Then I left for New Haven, Connecticut, to work in a corset factory. In New Haven, I met a group of young Russian students mainly, now working at various trades. Most of them were socialist and anarchists. They often organized meetings, generally inviting speakers from New York, one of whom was A. Solotarov. Life was interesting and colorful, but gradually the strain of the work became too much for my depleted vitality. Finally, I had to return to Rochester. I went to Helena. She lived with her husband and child over their little printing shop, which also served as an office for their steamship agency. But both occupations did not bring in enough to keep them from dire poverty. Helena had married Jacob Hochstein, a man 10 years her senior. He was a great Hebrew scholar on authority of the English and Russian classics. His income was insufficient for the needs of the family, and the one to worry and fret most about it was my poor Helena. She was pregnant, her second child, and yet had to drudge from morning till night to make ends meet, with never a word of complaint. But then she had been that way all her life, suffering silently, always resigned. On my return from New Haven, Helena received me as always, with tenderness and with the assurance that her home was also mine. It was good to be near my darling again, with little Stella and my young brother Yegor. But it did not take me long to discover the pinched condition in Helena's home. I went back to the shop. Living in the Jewish district, it was impossible to avoid those one did not wish to see. I ran into Kirshner almost immediately after my arrival. Day after day, he would seek me out. He began to plead with me to go back to him. All would be different. One day, he threatened suicide, actually pulled out a bottle of poison. Insistently, he pressed me for a final answer. Kirshner's threat frightened me. I could not be responsible for his death. I remarried him. My parents rejoiced, and so did Lena and her husband, but Helena was sick with grief. Without Kirshner's knowledge, I took up a course of dressmaking in order to have a trade that would free me up from the shop. During 3 long months, I wrestled with my husband to let me go my way. I tried to make him see the futility of living a patched life, but he remained obdurate. Late one night, after bitter recriminations, I left Jacob Kirshner and my home, this time definitely. I was immediately ostracized by the whole Jewish population of Rochester. I could not pass on the street without being held up to scorn. My parents forbade me their house, and again it was only Helena who stood by me. Out of her meager income, she even paid my fare to New York. So I left Rochester, where I had known so much pain, hard work, and loneliness, but the joy of my departure was married by separation from Helena, from Stella, and the little brother I loved so well. The break of the new day in the Minkin flat still found me awake. The door upon the old had now closed forever. The new was calling, and I eagerly stretched out my hands towards it. I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. I was awakened by Anna Minkin's voice announcing the arrival of Alexander Berkman. It was late afternoon.